Chapter 1. People say they understand compounding. They nod when they hear the word, repeat it casually, even build their identity around being long term. And then you watch their behavior and it tells a different story. The lived experience of compounding feels quiet, almost unremarkable, especially at the beginning. And most people struggle in anything that doesn't give fast emotional feedback. You see it in how traders describe flat weeks like a personal insult, in how they treat small wins like they don't count, and how quickly they pivot the moment progress slows down, even while they keep saying they're playing the long game. Compounding feels repetitive while it's building, and repetition without a visible payoff makes people restless, so they start reaching for stimulation, change, action, something that makes the day feel meaningful. Compounding only exists when behavior stays stable long enough for time to matter. And that stability has a psychological cost because it forces you to sit inside uncertainty without constantly trying to resolve it through movement. If you've ever felt like you were doing everything right and nothing was happening, you've touched the edge of the real challenge. Clean trades, controlled risk, manageable losses, modest wins, and that flat emotional texture where doubt creeps in like a whisper, asking if you're missing something, asking if you should adjust, asking if speed would feel better. That doubt becomes interference, and interference ends the compounding process long before the curve ever shows it. Intensity feels productive because it gives your nervous system the sensation of effort and control, while consistency can feel strangely invisible even when it's doing the real work. Sitting through a week where nothing dramatic happens takes a type of emotional control most people never train. And repeating the same behavior after small losses takes more discipline than swinging harder for a quick recovery. The early stages of compounding look identical to standing still, and if you measure success by how you feel instead of how you behave, you'll assume something is wrong and you'll start tweaking, comparing, negotiating, searching for novelty, anything that relieves the boredom. Compounding demands emotional neutrality, the ability to show up with the same posture regardless of a win, a loss, or a flat stretch. And most people are outcome reactive by default, so their behavior shifts even when they swear they're stable. The big lie people believe is that compounding will eventually feel rewarding in a way that motivates them to keep going. What actually arrives for most is acceptance, the kind that recognizes progress can be happening while your emotions feel unimpressed. Trading makes this harder because feedback is constant and loud. Every candle invites meaning, and you have to live with the contradiction of caring deeply about execution while letting individual outcomes pass through without becoming a story. If this already feels uncomfortably familiar, tap like right now, because accuracy deserves attention, and attention is the first thing compounding requires. The strange part is that you can do everything right and still feel like you're standing still. And that feeling doesn't mean nothing is happening. It means you're early, and early feels indistinguishable from nowhere. People quit there because they can't tell whether they're succeeding yet. And uncertainty without feedback is a stress most people refuse to tolerate. Compounding also exposes reliance on novelty, the constant urge for new strategies and new tweaks that creates the illusion of progress, while deepening is where real growth happens. If you've ever abandoned something that was working slowly because it felt too slow, you were experiencing the psychological requirement of compounding, colliding with a timeline your nervous system couldn't accept. Compounding doesn't respond to desire or impatience, it responds to repetition across enough cycles, and enough cycles always feels longer than people expect. That's why compounding ends up favoring temperament more than intelligence, favoring the people who can stay boring, stay consistent, and resist interference during quiet stretches. Stay with that thought, because it reframes the entire problem from math to psychology. And the next chapter is going to show you why compounding feels so clean in theory while real life keeps trying to pull you away from the behavior it needs. Chapter 2. Compounding feels powerful on paper because paper is quiet. A spreadsheet doesn't feel boredom, doesn't scroll past someone else's highlight reel, doesn't wake up on a random Tuesday and decide the day needs a win to feel meaningful. Real trading lives inside an environment designed to flood you with outcomes and invite constant interpretation. Charts updating, PNL shifting tick by tick, screenshots of gains framed as moments, communities that celebrate speed and drama. And even if you're trying to stay focused, the world around you keeps hinting that progress should look loud. Compounding grows in the background, and background processes are easy to interrupt when your attention is being pulled forward every minute. You don't have to be reckless to damage compounding. You just have to be responsive. Responsive to noise, responsive to comparison, responsive to restlessness, responsive to the feeling that you might be behind. People assume the problem is discipline, yet the real issue is short-term feedback constantly hijacking long-term behavior. Early in any compounding process, validation feels absent and you aren't losing badly, you aren't winning impressively. The results feel small compared to the time invested, and that's when the environment starts whispering questions that sound intelligent. Should you adjust? Should you do more? Should you speed up? Should you refine? Those questions feel responsible, yet they often serve impatience by giving it a reason to move. Most people never experience compounding long enough for it to matter because consistency gets eroded through micro adjustments that feel harmless in isolation. An extra trade here, a slightly larger size there. A filter skipped because the setup looks clean. A day extended because the session feels wasted. None of it feels like abandoning the plan. It feels like improvement, and that's why it's dangerous. Compounding asks for emotional insulation in a world of constant exposure, constant evaluation, constant comparison. And when you're surrounded by narratives that reward speed, it's easy to start minimizing your own small gains. And once small gains feel meaningless, the psychological anchor disappears. Pay attention to how you speak about your progress in your head, because language frames behavior, and behavior decides whether you protect the process or disrupt it. Modern timelines are shrinking everywhere. Faster feedback, faster validation, faster results, and compounding moves in the opposite direction, asking you to invest effort now while outcomes remain distant. That conflict shows up as restlessness, an itch to do more, an itch to feel engaged, and when the itch goes untreated, it turns into action that serves your emotions more than your edge. Even traits that help people early, curiosity, adaptability, willingness to act, can create unnecessary movement later because compounding thrives when stability becomes the default. You can see the pattern when people abandon something that works slowly for something that promises speed, because speed offers relief from uncertainty. Then the goalposts start shifting quietly. First, you want to stop losing, then you want to grow. Then you want to grow fast enough. And once success criteria become mood dependent, compounding never gets uninterrupted time. If you've ever felt like you keep resetting progress without understanding why, this is a likely reason. The approach didn't get the continuous runway it needed. Early compounding is behaviorally fragile, and tiny changes undo it. And most people make those changes reflexively because the environment rewards reflexes. If you're noticing this feels human more than technical, you're seeing it clearly. And if that clarity lands, tap like. Because honest framing beats hype, and the next chapter is about the phase where compounding starts moving, and the movement itself begins to create pressure. Chapter 3, there's a phase where compounding starts to produce visible progress, and that visibility changes people. The curve bends slightly, the account ticks up, the results finally look different enough to notice, and something shifts inside you because now the process feels real. Your mind starts projecting forward, imagining where this can go, imagining what this could become, and that projection carries emotion even when it looks harmless. Hope feels clean, it feels deserved, it feels motivating, and it can quietly attach weight to each trade. You begin protecting a future that doesn't exist yet, and you feel the pull to treat each decision like it contributes to a larger story. You can feel this in how losses land during this phase. Earlier on, losses were easier to absorb because expectations were modest. Now a loss feels like it interrupts momentum, and interruption triggers reaction. You might hesitate. You might press. You might start thinking in streaks. You might start watching the balance more often because the account is no longer practice. It feels like something you don't want to lose. Pressure builds quietly. Pressure to keep it going. Pressure to justify time invested. Pressure to avoid mistakes. Pressure to remain consistent in public if people are watching. Compounding doesn't like pressure because pressure bends behavior, and behavior is the engine. The paradox is that the closer you get to experiencing the full power of compounding, the stronger the urge to interfere becomes, because you can finally see the reward and your nervous system wants to secure it. People tighten rules out of fear, loosen rules out of confidence, and either way the baseline shifts, and the baseline is what created the curve in the first place. This happens outside trading too. The moment something starts working, you try to optimize it prematurely, scale it prematurely, protect it aggressively, extract more from it, and the instinct feels proactive while it's often fear wearing a suit. That's how compounding gets sabotaged during success, and it happens without the person feeling undisciplined. They feel responsible, they feel adaptive, they feel like they're managing. Meanwhile, the behavior that created compounding is being replaced by behavior that reacts to outcomes. This is why people make their biggest mistakes after a stretch of wins. Their relationship to the process changes, trades start carrying symbolic weight, and execution gets tighter or looser depending on emotion. If you've ever had a stretch where things were working, and then everything suddenly felt heavier, this is a common reason because slight changes compound too, and compounding multiplies what you repeat, even when what you repeat is anxiety, impatience, or overconfidence. Social attention adds another layer. People ask questions, they notice, they comment, and even if nobody demands anything, feeling watched shifts your internal pressure. Compounding grows best when you can keep emotional privacy, where progress exists without constant narration. If this chapter has you thinking about times where momentum created pressure, hit like right now, because naming a phase makes it less dangerous. The hardest part is that compounding often collapses near the middle, right when it starts feeling real. And the next chapter is about the lived behavior that lets you keep the process steady through boredom, through success, and through pressure. Chapter 4. Letting compounding run uninterrupted feels like restraint becoming normal. It doesn't feel heroic. It doesn't feel like white-knuckled discipline. It feels like fewer reactions. That absence of reaction can feel uncomfortable at first because reaction has been your default for so long that stillness feels like neglect. Compounding offers no clean milestone to wait for, no moment where you receive permission to relax, so the emotional skill here is acceptance, the kind that allows today to remain quiet without turning quiet into a problem. You accept that repetition can be progress even when it doesn't feel rewarding. You accept that your emotional experience doesn't need to feel productive for your behavior to be productive. Most growth narratives reward intensity and visible output, and compounding rewards stability over long stretches, which means desire and urgency become liabilities. Because urgency tends to produce adjustment, and adjustment changes the baseline. People who sustain compounding change how they relate to effort. They begin measuring effort by how little they disrupted the process. A day where nothing happened and nothing got damaged becomes a good day. A week that ends flat while behavior stays clean becomes a successful week. This is a redefinition that quietly changes everything because it gives your nervous system a stable frame. Decisions start feeling lighter over time, not because stakes drop, but because no single decision carries the weight of the future. That lightness comes from trust and repetition, the kind of trust built through cycles that keep proving to you that consistency protects you even when outcomes fluctuate. Boredom takes on a new meaning. It becomes a signal that nothing is pulling you into drama. Nothing is demanding reaction. The process is stable enough to fade into the background, and fading into the background is a feature, not a flaw. At first, boredom feels like wasted potential, like you should be doing more, like you're underutilizing your ability, like you're falling behind. And those feelings fade when you accumulate evidence that stillness doesn't create disaster. You skip an opportunity and the world doesn't end. You sit through a slow stretch, and your account survives. That evidence rewires behavior more reliably than motivation ever could. Compounding also requires pauses in short-term optimization. The urge to tweak and refine can be useful, and it can also keep you in a permanent state of motion that prevents stability from taking over. Long stretches of stable repetition allow later improvements to matter more because the baseline is consistent. Comparison loses grip during this phase because your focus shifts toward your own consistency rather than someone else's timeline. And once the sense of being behind fades, urgency fades with it, and urgency is one of the main drivers of interference. A quiet confidence shows up here, a confidence rooted in predictability. You know how you'll behave tomorrow. You know you won't abandon the process on a bad day. You know you won't overreact on a good one. And this predictability is the variable compounding needs. People talk about faith when they talk about compounding. And what you really build is tolerance for slow feedback, tolerance for ambiguity, tolerance for being unimpressed with your own progress longer than feels reasonable. If this chapter is shifting how you think about effort, pause and like the video as a reset, because realizations accumulate the same way compounding does. The people who make it through this phase rarely announce breakthroughs. They just keep the baseline stable long enough for time to become an ally, and the final chapter is about what compounding feels like once time is fully on your side. Chapter 5. When compounding is working in your favor, it doesn't arrive as a single moment you can point to. You realize the question disappeared. You stopped asking when it will kick in. You stopped checking whether it's working. You stopped needing proof every week. Your behavior has a rhythm that feels durable. The process can survive without constant supervision, and that durability is easy to underestimate until you remember how fragile everything felt before. The temptation to interfere still shows up, but it feels lighter, like background noise instead of an alarm. You've lived through enough cycles to recognize the cost of reacting, and restraint becomes natural through repetition. Time starts to feel different. You measure progress in seasons and arcs rather than days, and that longer horizon changes how you respond to short-term fluctuations. A bad day feels smaller. A good day feels smaller too. Both get absorbed into something larger that doesn't hinge on a single outcome. Conversations around you start to feel loud, filled with quick wins and hacks and breakthroughs, and you aren't operating at that emotional frequency anymore. You're letting time do work, and urgency becomes unnecessary. That distance can feel isolating at first, and it can also feel freeing because you're no longer chasing validation. One of the deeper benefits shows up outside trading. Decision-making becomes calmer elsewhere too. You stop forcing outcomes. You stop rushing processes. You become more comfortable living without immediate confirmation that you're on the right path. The numbers begin to matter less emotionally, even as they matter more practically, because you're observing outcomes instead of chasing them. You don't feel the need to prove anything, and that privacy protects the process. People who truly benefit from compounding rarely describe it with excitement. They describe it with simplicity because they've watched what happens when interference fades and the baseline holds. If you're realizing compounding is blocked more by tolerance than knowledge, sit with that for a moment, because it changes how you approach everything that requires time. Hit like if this clarified why compounding feels simple while it's still rare in practice, because staying with an idea long enough to really understand it is the same muscle compounding requires. Compounding rewards the people who can remain consistent without applause, without reassurance, without constant feedback. And once you understand that mechanism clearly, the frustration starts to dissolve and your behavior becomes easier to maintain. If you've been trying to force progress and watching it slip away, slow down in your next stretch and let repetition do its work. Subscribe if this kind of clarity is what you want around your trading. Because clarity is what makes consistency possible over long arcs, and long arcs are where compounding quietly changes everything.